Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Coping with Crisis. Here we're talking today about our focus has been on financing, financial issues. One of our sister organizations, the Institute for Decision Making at UNI, along with the Iowa Economic Development Authority, has done a very extensive survey of Iowa businesses this week in terms of the issues they're facing. And number one and number two are all about cash flow. As you can imagine, everyone is experiencing reduced sales. And so what we've tried to do here is focus on cash flow today. Earlier today at 10 o'clock, we had Dave Lentel from the SBA office talking about the EIDL loans, the economic crisis loans that they've conditioned our state for, and now folks are able to go after those through the SBA. And now this afternoon, we're going to be talking with Steve Lindaman, a credit officer with the Veridian Credit Union group. Steve, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here. I wish it was under different circumstances, however, so thank you.
I definitely do too. I know we've seen a few programs roll out this week to help businesses. We've got a couple of programs I'll quickly highlight from the state side. There's a small business grant relief program that is issuing up to $25,000 for small companies that have between 2 and 25 employees. There is a TSB relief grant program as well that's issuing I believe up to the same amount, $25,000, and that is for sole proprietorships that qualify under the TSB, or targeted small business definition of minority ownership. And so we'll be putting some links up to those programs after the fact. But just so you know, there are a couple of grant programs at the state level already going. As I mentioned, the SBA has put forth a disaster proclamation for the state, and we're now able to qualify for the disaster loans that are available there, which are mainly for working capital. But the big benefit of that SBA loan is it's a 30-year time horizon loan. It does carry an interest rate. It's still low, however, 3.75% interest rate. But at a 30-year amortization, that can be potentially a very small payment to help kind of cover you through some working capital time. So with those programs out there already, and I would tell you that there's heavy whispers about other programming coming down the pike. Dave alluded to it a little bit this morning in our session, though the details are far from finalized. But I think there will be come to be more and more programming for business from a financing standpoint. But until those things come to fruition, we've got to manage in the now. And so we brought Steve in today to talk through cash flow management. And Steve, I'm guessing you're getting a lot of calls right now. And first, so I appreciate that you took some time away from that to be with us. Can you kind of talk through a little bit of what your experience right now has been like with your portfolio of clients?
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. We're here to help, however, which is good. We have obviously a broad spectrum of different borrowers in different industries, but we have some that are worried about payroll next week, and we have some that are worried about capital expenditures that they were planning in the next 6 months. So we really have a wide range of folks and needs, I guess, at this point. So obviously we're trying to help those that need help sooner rather than later, just because that's the right thing to do. So we're taking a lot of phone calls, and I'm certain most bankers are as well. So
in those cases of, for those that are looking for operating money for today, tomorrow, next week, the next 2 weeks, I'm guessing those are folks that are looking at Friday's payroll and wondering where they're going to get it from, type of thing.
Yeah.
What kind of conversation are you having with them? What are the options that they have with their borrower? And how should they approach that conversation?
Well, the less time we have to respond, the more difficult that conversation is, right? So, be prepared if you're concerned about, maybe next month and running out of working capital, start having that conversation today, right? And whether it's, your source of capital, whether it's your banker or if you have investor or, other partners that you're, injecting cash with, start that conversation early, right? So that's the obvious answer, but it needs to be said,
Yep.
because some folks are living in the trenches and they're not, they're worried about tomorrow and they're not thinking about 3 weeks from now, right? So be cognizant of, we're gonna make it, and we're gonna make it to 3 weeks from now, right? So we got to make sure we have a plan in place for that. So for those folks that need money right now, short of these programs that they're rolling out right now, obviously your nest egg that you had set aside is the most obvious. If you can tap a paid off car loan or home equity line of credit or, those types of things. Worst case scenario is a cash advance on a credit card, right? If you have to have it tomorrow. So those are not great options, but they help bridge the gap to get you, down the road where we can plan a little bit better. So
I'm assuming you want to get a call from them before they do something with a credit card, or
absolutely,
even if there's no
yeah.
time left for you to do anything, maybe, or
It's never a bad idea to call and get a second opinion or a reassurance from your partner, right? So
yeah.
it never hurts to talk through those things. And that,
And
and I don't want to go back to when the business started or, but having that business plan, having that relationship with your lender, having that on the front end is going to pay serious dividends down the road as you come into a cash flow crunch, right? So
yeah.
it just further illustrates the need to plan well on the front end, right? So I know people don't want to hear that right now, but that's the reality. So
Yeah, sure. Foster a relationship rather than a I need you now and hopefully you remember who I am type of thing.
right.
Okay. From that cash flow perspective, are you getting clients talking to you about, helping them go through their burn rates and their, how far can I last type of thing? Or are you helping walk them through that stuff?
Yeah, so we'll have conversations similar to that. Figuring out the burn rate is pretty easy, right? I mean, they can look back in history and figure out how much cash they burn through in a month or 3 months, right? So
Yep.
I think where we can help, I think, is, identify those things that might not be obvious, but could help conserve cash, prioritizing your expenses. Obviously, payroll is probably the first and most important thing is, keep your employees, keep them paid, keep this economy going. That's the only way that this is all going to work, right, is if we keep our employees paid, right? So, paying your critical vendors, but maybe hold off on those vendors that you might not need or, aren't requiring payment right away. It sounds like there might be some payroll tax deferrals or relief. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to play out yet, but, don't pay payroll taxes if you don't need to, right? So seems obvious, but a lot of people, a lot of people have an accountant that does that for them, and if you don't tell the accountant that, hey, don't do this quite yet, they might do it. So, right, there's a
Same goes
property,
for sales tax and property tax. I know those are all being deferred to July at this point.
yeah, property taxes are as well, I heard. So, and that's, everybody right now is paying property taxes typically, right, at the end of March.
Right.
So
Right.
hold off on it, right? Yeah. So, and I think the biggest thing is for all of us right now is our mental health, right? I mean, it's important to stay in touch, follow the news, know what's going on, but limit that, I mean, you can't sit here and listen to the media all day long every day and have a positive attitude, right? So
Right. Oh, absolutely. For those that are looking at having to figure out what to do from a lending standpoint, should they look to their banker to kind of help? I assume they should, but should they look to their banker to help kind of go through the options of, is refinancing right now? Is that, I mean, they dropped the Fed rate back down to 0. How does that impact some of these folks that are borrowers with you guys right now?
So the Fed funds rate is the rate that banks lend to each other, so that doesn't impact directly the rates to a loan borrower, right?
Yep.
So, a lot of that just depends on the financial institution and their, cost structure and as far as loan pricing. But, yeah, I mean, it's a difficult time right now because we don't know what's going to be, where we're going to be in a month. So does it make sense to refinance? It might not, A lot of financial institutions, including us, in those situations, we're going to work with them to develop kind of the business plan moving forward. This is the new normal. We're going to, ask for some projections, some pro formas that show, okay, if I do this today, this is how I can work through this, assuming general recovery, right? So, and financial institutions are going to lean on the SBA to help provide that funding if it's warranted.
Are you advising any of your clients to go after or apply to the disaster relief loans that they've got now that are, at least the application is on?
Yeah, I worked with a gentleman yesterday. He and his wife have a business, and he was working through that application, and I didn't do the application for him, obviously, but I kind of helped him work through it and identify what he needed to provide. And it appears like it's not overly burdensome, so that's a great thing.
Right.
So I definitely, I mean, and it's not a first come first serve. So I don't know. I haven't gotten into the criteria of how they decide who gets what. So that I'm not sure, but and I believe you have to apply for that grant to get the deferral of sales tax that's due and those types of things as well. I don't know if you can add any input on that, or if Dave Lentel talked about that earlier today.
Yeah, well, so the one program you're talking about is the state program on the grant side, and there's one application. It's pretty streamlined for the state. I think they're calling it like a business relief grant of up to $25,000. And then in that application is where you can apply for deferral of property tax, sales tax, payroll tax, and maybe there's a couple more in there too until July. But then at the SBA level, they've got this disaster loan program, and I don't know if you've had anybody apply yet for that. That's a working capital loan that they apply for directly with the SBA. Maybe it hasn't circulated much at the bank since they don't have to go through the banks to get it, but I was just curious if you'd seen anything with that.
Yeah, I did see that. I believe it was yesterday, with a pretty low rate, 3 3/4, I think, rate loan. And I did notice there was some funding in there for nonprofits too, which is unheard of for the SBA too. So I don't know if there's any nonprofit folks on the webinar today, but that's something that I have not seen before, which is interesting. So
yeah, that's what Dave mentioned, was that was a new thing this time around. How do you help somebody look at a little bit of, are more loans good, or do I need to look at doing other things to keep the ship afloat? Do you as a lending partner want to be involved in that kind of a conversation with your business owners? I mean, sometimes it's easy to just fill out an application and take on more debt, stick a thumb in the dam, so to speak, but sometimes that's not the right approach. And I was just curious how those conversations go between a lender and an owner, and how much insight you try to provide there.
yeah, that's a great point. I mean, from a common sense standpoint, if I'm having trouble, making payroll and and generally not cash flowing more debt is, not always the good answer, right? I mean, if I can't meet my commitments today, I don't need more commitments, right? So
Right.
obviously we all hope it's temporary, and I think it will be, but it's just how long it will take to work through those things. So, those are definitely conversations to have. I'd like to get back to, prioritizing your cash flow, right, or your expenses to conserve your cash. Identifying those sources of flexibility. I mean, we talked about, the property taxes, payroll taxes, possibly those types of things, but there's other options out there that you can, if you're a tenant and you have a landlord, and call your landlord and say, hey, you know what, I'm not in a good spot right now, and what can you do for me? Can you lower my rent by half for the next 3 months, and then tack it on down the road, or so I would say ask the question, because it never hurts to ask the question, right? Because the landlord, who's probably has debt on, if it's a building or what have you, the landlord's probably going to be contacting his banker and say, hey, I have some tenants that are going through some tough times. What can you do for me, right? So it's, the tenant goes to the landlord and asks for some relief, and the landlord's probably going to go to the bank and ask for some relief. And so I just don't be afraid or ashamed to do that.
Have you already seen that? Have you already taken calls on the commercial property side from landlords?
Absolutely. Yep. Quite a few, actually. So.
And they're saying, hey, I've got tenants I don't want to lose, or yeah, if I lose them, there's certainly nobody on a list that's going to sign up tomorrow to take their spot. Is that the kind of conversation they're having with you? A lot of our folks listening to these are oftentimes renters, I think,
Yeah, absolutely. If the tenant can't make the rent and leaves, then the landlord's sitting there with an empty space, right? And finding a tenant to fill that space now would be very difficult. So I think everybody has the obligation, to help at this point in time. So I mean, we're all in this together, so to speak, and I think if we all help participate, I think we can pull through it. So
I don't know, can you comment at all about, if things have loosened up a bit, so to speak, in terms of maybe what the lending environment looked like 3 weeks ago versus what your answer would be to somebody calling you today? I don't know.
well, yeah, I mean, I think our first priority is helping our existing clients, right? I mean,
Yep.
it's, we want to help everybody, but our focus today is helping those that we already work with, right? So
Right.
if it's a new client looking for assistance, we're going to do our best to help them, but we're probably going to be focusing first on those that we've worked with before, right? So.
But you do feel armed to be a little more accommodating or flexible, or I don't know what, sometimes those aren't words that are used very often in the financial industry. So I don't know what.
Right. Yeah, I
What
would
it was
say
like.
definitely. I mean, there's definitely, I think all banks and credit unions are more willing to work today than they may have been 2 months ago, right? And there was regulatory guidance sent out, I think last week or the week before, from the FDIC, the NCUA, that says, hey, we're not going to criticize your financial institution if you would work with these borrowers in a way that makes sense to help them succeed and pull through this. So obviously the regulators don't want us to make decisions that are gonna harm us and ultimately the depositors, but they also want us to have some flexibility and work with people through this. So.
Sure, it's a balancing act there, I suppose. I'll take a quick break here now and just thank anybody who's with us live and encourage you that if you have questions about your specific situation and maybe you're afraid to talk to your own banker, this is an opportunity to maybe ask an anonymous question or two of Steve, and maybe you're going to be speaking for all bankers to some extent, Steve, but kind of sharing your general thoughts. We appreciate that. So if you have questions, please throw those at us. If you have questions after this session, want to get a hold of somebody from our webinar today, or somebody here at UNI that you'd like to talk to, you can call us at 319-273-IOWA. You can also check us out online at advanceiowa.com. Again, I'm speaking with Steve Lindaman at Veridian Credit Union, who's one of their senior lenders. Steve, if we go back to the cash flow side of things, and that's kind of where we were at. We were talking about call the landlord, see what they can do to work with us. What's some of the other things that are on your list that you give folks who start to hit the skids, so to speak?
Yeah, that's probably the first and foremost, right, is, reducing your overhead. So, what other things do you have in your overhead? Every business that we look at is different, so it's hard for me to pull one out of a hat, but, you have those expenses every month. You have occupancy, which is rent or building payment or whatever, right? So, you have
Yep.
utility costs. Well, you probably have to pay your utility costs, right?
You haven't
One thing
seen
that
anything where the utility folks have been becoming lenient for your clients or anything by chance, have you?
I haven't yet. I think that it's
How far away are
probably,
we from that?
yeah, probably 2 to 3 weeks, 4 weeks maybe, One thing that you surely should pay is, insurance, business insurance, property insurance, those types of things. You can't have that lapse, right? Because then you're really at risk. So
Yep.
that's an important one, right? So don't flex on that. But
What do you suggest to folks who are looking at their receivables column and maybe it's a nice big number? The temptation is to either start becoming a bill collector, or I'm sure you get, factoring companies and other types like that are constantly direct mailing and calling and whatnot.
yeah,
What's your opinion on that one?
I was a bill collector in my past life for a manufacturer locally, and you become the bill collector in a big hurry in a situation like this, because the first one who speaks up probably gets paid, right? So that I would get pretty aggressive on that side right now.
So at the same time that you're trying to, you're on one phone talking to somebody about being more lax, you've got to be on the other phone talking about, hey, I need your money.
Yeah, it's all about converting those assets to cash, right? Whether it's accounts receivable or, inventory is the hard part right now, because you're not converting inventory to cash right now because you're not selling probably, right? So you got to find those items on your balance sheet that you can convert to cash.
Yep.
Accounts receivable is probably I don't want to say the easiest, but the most obvious.
Yeah, and what other things as you go through a balance sheet are you looking at as far as, what can I do here? Is this something I can do something with?
Yeah, I mean, if you have, assets you don't use anymore, you got an old forklift or an old straight truck or, whatever assets you have in your business that, it's nice to have, but you don't need it.
Yeah.
Not the best time to sell either, but, that might be the ticket to, get to the end of next month, or, those types of things. So,
Sure.
underutilized assets, accounts receivable, inventory, all those types of things.
Okay. And before they go to a factoring company, you want them to call you first, I assume, or?
Yeah, factoring is pretty expensive, right? It can solve an immediate cash flow issue, but you're gonna suffer your profitability, because of it, right? So
Mm-hmm. But at
that
times
might
like
be
this.
that might be a decision you have to make eventually, but you want to make that knowing what you're doing, right? You want to know you're sacrificing profitability for cash flow.
Is there, let's see here. Is there any sense you can tell us about what you experienced maybe in the 2008 flood crisis? I know you were a lender then in an area that was affected by the flood, and were there any things that you saw from that that maybe were lessons learned for small businesses, or were um, creative ways that you saw folks being able to kind of hang on, so to speak, in an incredibly tough environment that we experienced then?
Yeah, it's hard to compare. The floods of '08 were, in this market where I was a lender, were pretty isolated, I guess. We didn't have mass destruction like Cedar Rapids or, a market like that. So
Yeah.
the businesses that were affected could still find sales, they could still find revenue because it was more isolated. This is just a whole new ballgame where everybody and everything has just come to a screeching halt. So it's hard to say we learned lessons from '08 because it's a totally different ballgame this time around.
Okay. Um, let's see here, Steve. One more question on credit, and uh, just from the standpoint of how long it might take and those kinds of things. So, like, let's say I need money for payroll tomorrow, Friday. It's a popular payroll day for a lot of companies, and I don't have it. You probably already know that, I'm guessing, as my banker. Maybe not, but how quickly can you you know, can you get money to somebody that needs it? And then along with that, what if a better program comes out at the state or federal level, SBA or otherwise, um, to then maybe pay you guys off? I'm guessing you're all for that, but I just was curious what time horizons might look like for somebody to work with their banker.
Yeah. As I said before, if you need payroll tomorrow, today is getting pretty late, right? So,
Yeah.
the more time we have to help, the better, right? So if you need money tomorrow, you're probably looking at a credit card advance or something along those lines, right? And, those can be obviously pretty almost instantaneous, right? So, but yeah, if we look at a short-term kind of stopgap measure to bridge the gap to an SBA application and funding, that's always an option. Um, I don't know the strings that are attached with the SBA disaster assistance loans. I will say I do remember from the SBA flood disaster assistance back in '08, there were some requirements that, and I don't remember this very specifics, but I remember, for instance, if you had a home, they would put a mortgage on your home before you could get the money, right? So,
And I know that they don't have that this time around, actually, according to Dave this morning. So that is actually another piece of good news. The rates are low. They're not requiring personal assets.
okay, that's
Uh,
good.
the
So,
amortization
like, the
is
moral of the story is just be aware of what those strings might be, because in the past they've had those strings, and not always people didn't always realize what those were until, and in most cases they probably didn't have another option anyway, so it was going to be what it was. But you want to understand the decision that you're making at the time you make it. So.
Yep. Okay. Our guest this afternoon is Steve Lindaman, a senior loan officer with Veridian Credit Union. Steve, I think I got to all the questions that we had. And we're trying to keep these short so people can hear a little bit about how do I work with my banker. I think in summary, you're saying if you didn't call yesterday, you should call today. Don't put it off. Be proactive, like any other communication that you're having with your employees or your vendors or your customers. Get it out there in the open so that there is time to maybe do something rather than without time, there's really no options or very few options. Is that kind of the big message here?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the more the more people you have on your team, so to speak, the better you're going to be, right? I mean, you have a banker, you have an attorney, you have a CPA. The more people that you can run your scenario in front of, the better, right? Because you know what, you might not see something that somebody else might see. So,
Sure.
you know, have those partners. That's very important.
All right, perfect. That's a great point to kind of talk with. I mean, the CPAs now, I don't know how, I'm sure they're still very busy, but I know they have extended personal tax deadlines out a few months now, so maybe that gives them a little breathing room too to be able to help some of their business clients. And it's a good point to be able to work with those folks as well. So thank you, Steve. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate your time. And I think I'll wrap it up by just saying, if you have more questions or to check out more of our resources, please go to advanceiowa.com. You can go to iasourcelink.com, which is also a UNI and Iowa Economic Development Authority joint program dedicated to help small businesses across the state. Or you can call us at 319-273-IOWA. Also on the archive, there will be contact information for Steve's group at Veridian, but also for us here at UNI, as well as other resources within this cash flow management area. So thank you, Steve, so much. We appreciate your time, and good luck with your clients. Take care.
All right, thank you. Great to be with you.
Thanks.